presentation by Jamie Court, the president of Consumer Watchdog. Jamie, how are you? Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm really gratified to be here. I haven't seen a discussion like this in 15 years on gas prices. That was when I got tapped to learn a little bit about him by Antonio Villaraigosa when he was the Speaker of the Assembly. And there was the first gas price spikes of our modern times in 1999, and he created this task force under the auspices of the Attorney General, Bill Lockyer. And so I've learned and observed a little bit about the gasoline market, though we've obviously been involved in other areas, primarily over the many 15 years. And I just want to give you a little bit of sitting through maybe 40 hours of meetings, what I learned and what I've observed over the last 15 years, which is things haven't changed very much since that task force. This is a chart from the EIA, the Energy Information Administration. We have copies of our report and our copies of our presentation. But what we see in California is consistently high over the last 10 years, according to this chart, prices. The gap between national average and California average over 10 years historically is 32 cents. And that includes in the national average number by EIA, the California gas price. So it's actually a much larger gap. It's a very, very big gap. And today the gap is 84 cents. So it gets bigger. The things that concerned us primarily with this task force, and the things that should concern you and obviously are the spikes, the peaks there. Because when that gas price gets really far, like 84 cents, 94 cents, these price spikes are producing unbelievable circumstances. If we go to the next slide. This is the February price spike. Californians spent an extra $550 million in February on their gasoline. And if you look here, we're charting here on the left the price of crude oil, which you see falling, and that's the red line. And the blue line is the price of regular gasoline, carb gasoline in California. And you'll see how as crude falls, we still see the price go up. It's obviously precipitated by the shutdown of the Tesoro refinery initially, and later, 16 days later, the Exxon Torrance refinery explosion. Now, when we saw on February 2nd the Tesoro refinery go down, the executive Tesoro, CEO of Tesoro, told investors he could have, even with that strike that he said was imminent, he told investors we can keep that plant running because you could use contract workers, you could use managers, we could have kept that plant running. And yet we see the impact of that shutdown to 8% of the gas supply when that refinery explosion hits. It just goes up like a rocket, like a Houston rocket. And I'll tell you, when we start to look at why that Tesoro refinery went down, really, we don't know. When we look at whether that Exxon Torrance refinery was continuing to run during the crisis immediately after at full speed, half speed, we don't know. California Energy Commission may know, but the public doesn't know. I don't know. I do know this, that $550 million is the total for that month, and if you take away the 15 cents extra that California pays in higher taxes than the national average, we're still, by the way, at $400 million, just short of $400 million after taxes that the oil industry has retained and made. And as your report for the committee says, that all goes to the oil refiners. This is a profit for the oil refiners of $400 million for a dollar price spike in the month of February. The difference nationally for the entire period of 10 years of that 32 cents per gallon, which I think is a conservative estimate, it's $47.5 billion more we've paid in California over 10 years. If you take away the taxes, the 15 cents extra a gallon per taxes, so after tax, that costs consumers about $24 billion over 10 years, California consumers. That's how much extra we have paid for our gasoline because of the forces you've heard today. Go to the next slide. The forces we identified in 1999. This is the most thorough investigation I know of, sanctioned by this committee, of gas prices in the state, and there hasn't been one since. But we found very clearly, after listening to many presentations like the one you just heard, which had a lot of numbers from the industry and not the industry. I believe Phil Vertigler was there. Yes, he was. Nice seeing you. That's right. He taught me everything I know, but he works for the oil company, so you got to be careful. I distilled my knowledge to what was important. Let's put it that way. The supply disruption, and so everybody came to this
I think
conclusion.
the word is you refined your knowledge.
Right,
Bump.
very good. So supply disruptions that contributed to these price spikes were because refiners have little spare capacity to cover outages. Refiners maintain relatively low levels of inventory. Refiners have significant market control. And we have a problem with carb gas being something that can't be made elsewhere and import. So these same factors are controlled today. If you go to today's market, you will see two refiners, Tesoro and Chevron, control 56% of the market. So if I do not believe, and we'll find out, I imagine at some point from the annual reports, I don't believe that Tesoro is really not going to make a killing off the closure of its Martinez refinery. I really don't believe that. But we'll see. And I don't believe that Exxon's going to be hurting its downstream revenue either. What this consolidation does is a lot of things, but most importantly, it keeps us running on empty and short supplies. We're not making enough to have an ample supply to cover when these refineries go down. What happens is the commodities market is what's spiking this price of gasoline. If there's no real shortage, there is at least a perceived shortage. The price of gas goes up, and it goes up very precipitously. And when we ran into a few of these problems since 1999, I want to just give you an example of what, it's not just, by the way, there's many angles to this. We're just looking at refiners today. But there's also the disappearance of independent gas stations. There's a proliferation of branded gas stations. So, I mean, Exxon may have contracts with its own gas stations, but Exxon controls much of what happens at those stations. I don't think we can go into that too much today. But the point being, refiners don't have an interest in making more gasoline or having higher inventories. So we have a situation like happened in 2004 when Shell wanted to close its Bakersfield refinery. And we said, wait a second, we're experiencing high gas prices. You're going to take 2% of the gasoline and 6% of the diesel offline. Why? And they said, we're not making money. And a whistleblower came to us. And with the help of the Attorney General, and I believe Kathleen Foote was there at the time, with the help of Senator Barbara Boxer, there was a big investigation. Shell was required or voluntarily agreed to find a buyer with the help of the Attorney General, getting them a broker. Find a fair price, because we found out it was a very profitable refiner. And none of these other refiners you're looking at now wanted to buy the Shell refinery. It was Flying J, which was a truck stop, which tells you what happens when you have a consolidated market. This is an apples to apples comparison of days of gas supply. This is all data from the Energy Information Administration. And what we've done is look at days of supply in refineries and terminals nationwide and refineries and terminals in California. And we've taken consumption data nationwide from the EIA, and we've taken consumption data from the Board of Equalization. And if you look in the presentation from the Energy Commission, they publish very different numbers. They publish only not refinery and terminal, bulk terminal data, which could be compared to the EIA. So we're looking at apples and apples here, and what we find is if you look at refinery and bulk terminals, the U.S. for 10 years has an average of 18.7 days on hand. This is all of the U.S. This is averaging those huge inventories in the Gulf with the little inventories in some parts of the East Coast. California, the island that can import gas easily from wherever else, we have 10.7 days. We have a week less of refined supply on hand. A week less of refined supply on hand. And that is what's causing the problem, because you can look at gas prices as they rise. It's obviously as supplies drop or inventories drop. Now, we can't stop the refinery outages. We can't stop a refinery fire, but we can have an ample cushion of the type of gasoline we need in this state to make up the difference so the commodities market doesn't go nuts when the gasoline it perceives that gasoline is in short supply. Hope I've said that correctly. These are the price spikes over the last decade. We found they're often precipitated by refinery problems. These are just various refinery problems. This system is made to break. The oil company's keeping it running on empty. And when it breaks, you see a price spike. And the price spike, as we have just noted from the commission, as your report notes to this committee, is all profit for the refiners involved. They have every incentive to want to create a price spike like this because their crude oil contracts are consistent, their taxes are consistent, and when the prices go up, refiners make a lot of money. Does that sound familiar to you? It sounds not like Sandy, a market that was struck by Sandy. It sounds like a market that was struck by Enron. And the similarities to the energy market in California are very real. I was there, and I feel that way. And I heard many explanations at the time in this building and outside of this building for the energy supply, not in the Senate, of course, because John Burton ran the Senate back then. But it sounded a lot like some of the explanations I've heard today, and I'm sure I'm going to hear pretty soon. The reality is, we don't know. I don't know. Consumer Watchdog knows. The public doesn't know. You don't know what actual real-time inventories are. Current days of supply in the state are not publicly available. I'm taking the commission's word that it knows, and it's just not able to tell us. But I can tell you we have very little transparency because we have 3 months lagging on days of supply in the state. We know gas prices every week from the EIA, but there's a huge lag on inventories. And I think since there is no agency publicly disclosing that or publicly disclosing information on outages and maintenance at refineries in real time, that's what's keeping us blind to what's really happening. And I believe there are many state agencies that knew about what was going on with electricity trading, and that didn't seem to prevent it back in 2001. We need public transparency about refinery outages, refinery capacity, when refineries are running, when there's supply on hand. Next one is a slide that says everything about how this is like a Houston rocket rather than any other type of rocket, and how this is a lot more like Enron than it is Sandy. You'll see that except for the period right after the recession, 2007-8, 2008, 2010, when things hit really badly, as the price of gas goes up, so do downstream. That means refining, transportation, not crude production, but downstream margins, downstream profits for Chevron, which is the largest refiner in the state. And you'll also see at the end of the year, that red line is quarterly gas prices. This was before our price spike. You saw how quarterly gas prices went down? The blue line is refining margins for Chevron. They were going up. And what happened, we don't know because we don't have the data, but you can imagine that as the price of gas went up, those refining margins for Chevron, those first quarter margins are going to go up through the roof. I'll just leave you with this, that when we were exploring this market in 99 and 2000 and came up with that report, we were privy to a bunch of internal memos, and Senator Ron Wyden made some of these public. But this is what happened in the early to mid-90s. All of the major oil companies have had memos similar to this. This is a memo from Chevron, our largest refiner in the state. And it says that an senior energy analyst at a recent API convention, this is the American Petroleum Institute, said, if the petroleum industry doesn't reduce its refining capacity, it will never see any substantial profits, any increase in refining margins, profits. In the last 9 months, gasoline demand has been healthy and inventories remain close to record low levels, factors that should normally lead to higher prices. However, refining utilization has been rising, sustaining high levels of operations, thereby keeping prices low. All of this boils down to one thing. Oil refiners in this state want to keep inventories low, supplies low, refining capacities low so they can keep prices high. They don't compete to make more gasoline to undercut the other's price. They work together to keep refining capacity limited so prices can be as high as possible. And that's why we have California paying, even after taxes, $24 billion more than the rest of the nation over the last 10 years. My conclusion is simple, having watched this play out. California needs to collect and publicly disclose real-time data about refinery operations and days of supply on hand. You wouldn't believe how hard it is to get an accurate figure on days of supply on hand, because the EIA does keep refinery and terminal data, bulk terminal data, and they don't keep the same sets of data that the California Energy Commission keeps and publishes. And so to do this calculation, we had to get California-specific data on the refineries and bulk terminals, and we got then the national average for refineries and bulk terminals, and that's national, including California. So we can tell you there's a weak spread between inventories calculated that way in America and in California, and we believe California should mandate that refiners keep what is the equivalent of 8 days of supply measured, 18 days of supply measured that way of gasoline on hand. That may not be the right number. The point is, we should keep an ample supply on hand so that when a refinery or two break down, which is typically the pattern, prices don't go up $1 in a month. Right now, we don't have that. I don't believe that we have a very good, transparent system that lets us tell us what that number is. Based on our number, we can say pretty confidently that in bulk terminals and refineries, there's a weak difference in supply between us and the national average. We think that's got to change, and we hope you'll help us change it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Court. Next, we'll hear from Jay McKee.
The folks from Consumer Watchdog. Fascinating presentation, really very provocative, and it got me thinking a lot. I guess I'm just trying to think of how much your recommendations will really make a difference to addressing the kind of big problems we've been talking about today.
Well, look, I mean, this is the kind of deliberation we had in the task force. It's a very confusing topic area, and I just think there's a lot of frustration on behalf of consumers. So we can talk about economic theory, but the reality is that consumers paid $500 billion more in February for their gasoline. And the answers that we've heard today are, well, there's some shipments on the way. We know it's going to happen again another month with a price spike. Yeah. So you either have to regulate refineries in some way so as to make sure that they run in a way that supplies the market amply so that one or two breaks, it doesn't set this price spike in motion. You need to mandate some level of inventories where it is safe if two refineries break. And by the way, on constitutionality issues, we heard a lot of this when we passed Insurance Reform Prop 103 in 1988, and it was held constitutional. You can't take from the insurance industries, and we heard a lot of this during the energy crisis. My reference to the energy crisis, by the way, isn't so much about just the commodities trading. It was about companies shutting down power plants to withhold energy to drive up the price, which we later proved was true. Yep. And when that happened, we wanted to use eminent domain to go in and seize them. And we heard many of the same legal arguments, and no one ever did. And eminent domain would have been upheld. This is definitely an area to take some bold steps. The thing that I see that's really troubling and frustrating is we have statements, for instance, from Tesoro's executive that he could have kept Martinez running. And I'm the only one who's asking the question. He's not here to answer them. Instead, we have Phil is a delightful dinner partner. He's a really charming man, but he doesn't represent the oil companies. He does not represent the CEOs of the oil. He cannot tell us why Tesoro went down, whether Exxon was running at full speed. And I really feel like the oil companies, who, by the way, in November of last year said gas prices would go up 75 cents in January because of the cap and trade program, have to answer these questions, because gas prices didn't go up a dime. They went down in January when we started cap and trade. They went up $1 in February when their refineries went offline. They're the problem, not environmental laws in the state. And we need to bring them here and ask them those questions. And so I think they have to be part of the solution. They can tell us a little bit more about their refinery operations, but I have no doubt that the way to deal with this problem is to deal with it at the refiner level, because the refiners are the one that controls this market. It could be in terms of refinery operation. And by the way, they have a lot of safety problems, too, that deserve some more oversight. Supply, inventory, all I can tell you from this casual observance of the industry over 15 years is that refiners are rigging the market, and they are keeping it on less inventories than is the national average. That seems to have a huge impact when these refineries break. And it's not just me. I talk to journalists and others who watch this market, and it is unmistakable. People who've watched this for 10 years. One refinery goes down, prices go up a little. Two refineries go down, prices go through the roof. Is that an accident? I don't know, but I don't have the power to answer that question. My guess is it's not.
But you think just knowing more, having more information about maintenance and accidents and that kind of thing in real time is...
I think absent the will to regulate the refineries and inventories, which I believe is necessary, the next best step is greater transparency so that more eyeballs can watch what the refiners do, how much supplies they hold, how they function. Because then we're going to have a lot more smart people who aren't paid by the oil industry watching it.
And when you say regulate the refineries, you're talking about requiring reserves.
I think requiring more information to be publicly disclosed about when they're down in real time and why and when they're going to come back up. I'm talking about requiring them to actually report more accurate inventory data. The California Energy Commission inventory data apparently is only refineries, the ones they make public. It's not even bulk terminals. The EIA has refineries and bulk terminals. There's also pipeline. We can't get our hands on this without more information. But more importantly, yes, I do believe that looking at refiners' operation and creating a way to regulate them, because the CEC is an information gathering body. It is not a regulatory body.
And you just heard the concerns from New England and elsewhere with regards to reserves. How do you respond to them?
Well, look, you can keep a low reserve somewhere else where you can bring product in quickly. You can keep a huge reserve in the Gulf where it's fungible. In California, carb gasoline is an isolated island. I don't believe that Saudi Arabia is going to make carb gasoline and get us in time to stop our price spike. It may take 3 weeks. They may do it, but we're going to have paid another $500 million. That's the kind of behavior this market continues to tolerate because no one's telling the oil companies they cannot do it. And I think that particularly as we're having this debate about increasing our greenhouse gas reduction standards, and the oil companies say, oh, that's going to cost the consumer 75 cents. It's absolutely time to look at how they're operating on the consumer side and taking this in through more investigation and asking the CEO some questions like, why did you take down this Tesoro Martinez refinery when you told investors it could keep running? Now, you couldn't know there'd be a refinery explosion in Exxon, but nonetheless, that seems like a lot of gas to take off the market.
We're going to wrap up.
Thank you guys so much.
We're going to wrap up the hearing and open it up to public comment.